over the years we've been lucky enough to do a good bit of research into income levels in Clare and particularly into poverty in Clare. So we, as you can imagine, we love when the CSO comes out with figures, but just to say that they caution on their own figures today that these are estimates and that there are huge variables involved. So to say what we're getting is a snapshot rather than actual data, or in most cases. So, but just to say that it doesn't surprise us at all. To see Clare with a lower than average share of the national income, and that's for a few reasons. One is, it's the type of investment that is in Clare. Outside of Shannon, tells a very different story. In Clare, we're not big areas for foreign direct investment. Also not big areas for, indigenous, for example, indigenous manufacturing and so on. So those are the things. In some ways, if you thought about Clare and you thought about a rural county, you'd probably be kind of thinking things like agriculture, tourism and so on. But both of those are quite low income. They're quite low income, so they wouldn't compare to the huge companies that are paying out big salaries in Dublin and in the other regions. So we're not surprised, but we also think that in the 25,000 disposable income, there's a lot. When you take an average, that takes in obviously the best salary that is in Clare, the best salary and income that is in Clare, and it also takes in the worst off. So lots of people are not in that situation at all. We would say most of the people that we deal with in community groups and out across Clare, they'd be dying for the day when they see their 25,000 disposable income coming into their bank account. So it's not as clear cut as it looks, but it's still a good indication. It's also, I think it's also pretty accurate. Like if we think of the counties that are worst off in Ireland, we can tend to think of counties like the border counties and the border counties outside of the commuter belt and kind of Donegal. Clare comes in and has really come in next, just under those for a long number of years now at this stage. So that's around about sixth would be where I'd expect us to be, but it bears much more analysis. It bears much more analysis and going into the figures of what is that income from, who's getting it, how is it distributed, what's the median income instead of the average. So we, like I said, we love to see these figures coming out, but there's a lot more to be studied specifically in Clare. One of the things that we really found when we did research, and one of the things we really wanted things like the labour force survey to be done and published on a county basis. They had changed to doing them on a regional basis. So, for example, we would get a labour force survey for the Midwest region. Now that means, that really covers up disparities that happen at a local level. Like there's quite a strong difference between us and Tipperary. And you'd wonder why that is in particular, which advantages Tipperary has that Clare hasn't. So those are things that bear looking at. Like Limerick, we can understand there's a much higher income in Limerick, disposable income in Limerick than Clare, according to the CSO. But it does have a city, whereas Clare doesn't have a city in it. And we would think possibly is more of a manufacturing base and so on. So that's, we'd really like, the more local you can go with data, the more useful it is, because it helps you plan what you need. So and what we mean by that is, like, there's no point in us in Clare, all of those who work in community development, planning to invest in things that make our communities worse off. Rather, we should be looking at what is it that would help sustainable, long-term incomes that would enable people to, build their families and live all phases of their life out in Clare. So that's what this data helps us with, but it's not the whole picture.
And finally, what would you suggest could be done to change the county's position?
Well, I think, I think we're learning, all the organisations in the county, from the county council, from the people who run the Leader programme, Clare Local Development Company, rural development officers, and, all the local enterprises. Everybody, that's a question that everybody looks at. Now, for us in the PPN, we really want to see people, there are key areas that we have a lack of in Clare. So those would be around healthcare, social supports, carers, public transport and so on. And we really think that focusing on those and significant investment from the state into Clare in those would be really worthwhile and would provide benefits. The other thing we think, there is and I mean, this is like a kind of our researcher that did work for us before. One of the things that came into him in a focus group was that people were saying to him, Clare's for your holidays and for wind farms, right? And so, like, if you look at that, now that obviously is only anecdotal, but if you look at that, a wind farm or a data center or an offshore emergency gas facility like they're talking about now, those are all really low employment their infrastructure, but they're low employment infrastructure, whereas tourism is high employment, but it's low income. So it's like we'd need to look inside of that, where we can support indigenous businesses to grow, businesses with up to 50 employees, for example. Those could be anything. They could be in education, they could be in well-being, they could be in caring, they could be in anything, skills, teaching, they could be in tech, they could be in website development, IT, it could be in services, it could be in financial sector, but really that small indigenous industry is what will secure Clare in the long term. There's a lot of talk, and it's a little bit old-fashioned, but a lot of talk about securing a big employer, a kind of a foreign direct investment, a big employer into Clare. And, that surely would provide jobs and income, but that in a way that's the least secure way of building prosperity, because you're dependent then on that employer. You're dependent on global trends, not meaning that employer packs up and goes, and so those are the things. In a way, if the conditions for businesses and communities to thrive are created, then those type of investments will happen themselves.